Welcome to today's deep dive. I am I'm incredibly excited to get into the material we've got stacked up on the desk today.
Yeah, we have a massive amount to cover.
We really do, and we are tailoring this entire discussion specifically for those of you listening who are, deeply interested in the men's rights movement.
Right.
For the manosphere, and for red-pilled men out there who are seeking to truly understand the historical shifts in our modern institutions.
Because if you're someone looking to understand the history of these institutions before they were captured by feminists and Marxists.
As our source material today argues.
Exactly, as the author claims. If that's you, then you are in exactly the right place.
Absolutely. But before we go any further, do me a huge favor. Please take a second to like and subscribe to this deep dive right now.
It really helps us out.
It does. It helps us continue to bring you these unfiltered, extensive explorations of the most talked about material out there.
And our mission today is a big one.
A massive one. We are reviewing a fascinating, ultra-long, and highly incisive new ebook. It's titled Gynocentric Justice: Courts Betraying Men, Rewarding Women.
By Conrad Reicher.
Right. Copyright 2025. It is a wildly provocative manifesto that is making serious waves right now.
Huge waves.
And I strongly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book so you can follow along.
There is just a sheer volume of raw data we're about to unpack.
So much data. Also, be sure to follow at Conrad Reinreicher at Substack to keep up with his ongoing work.
Highly recommend that.
So our goal today is to thoroughly distill the core arguments Reicher presents. How biology, law, and culture all intersect.
We're going to look closely at the data sets, the deeply personal anecdotes he includes, and that overarching thesis he builds regarding modern masculinity.
But before we take that plunge, I want to pass it over to you to lay out some essential groundwork for how we're approaching this text today.
Yeah, thank you. Before we jump into the deep end here, we want to make our ground rules absolutely clear to you, the listener. Our goal today is to impartially report on the content of this ebook. We are not endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Exactly.
We are acting strictly as your objective guides to unpack the arguments, the data, and the claims that Conrad Reicher presents. This source material contains highly polarized, politically charged claims regarding gender, feminism, and institutional capture.
It definitely does.
So our role is simply to synthesize this information so you can clearly understand the architecture of this major cultural perspective.
Just laying it all out on the table.
Right. We will be framing these assertions exactly as the author presents them, allowing you to evaluate his conclusions for yourself.
Perfectly stated. So let's just get right into the foundational premise of the book. Reicher starts by establishing a framework he calls the gaslighting of masculinity.
Which is a heavy term.
It is, and he ties it directly to the pathologizing of male biology. He opens with this very specific argument that society has essentially convinced an entire gender that their natural biological instincts are actually psychological defects.
Yeah, he asks the reader to consider, when society last expressed gratitude to men simply for being men?
Not for their utility.
Right, not for what they produce or provide, but just for their inherent nature. According to the book, modern culture currently treats male strengths as literal crimes.
And what really stands out about his approach here is how quickly he grounds this cultural critique in hard biological data.
He doesn't waste time on sociological theory.
No, he moves right past it and points directly to neurochemistry and evolutionary psychology.
Like the 2019 Harvard study he leans on so heavily.
Yes, the one dealing with human stress responses. According to the author's analysis of this study, when faced with an acute threat, male cortisol spikes in a way that actively narrows and enhances focus.
And Reicher frames this not as some toxic behavioral choice, but as a literal evolutionary gift.
Right, a neurochemical response optimized for hunters. Men who had to confront incredibly dangerous prey like mastodons.
In absolute silence and extreme focus.
Exactly. And he contrasts that explicitly with the female stress response outlined in that same data.
He notes the female physiological response involves a massive surge of oxytocin during stress.
Which prioritizes communal bonding and vocalization.
Because, the book argues, that was vital for the survival of child-rearing groups. It ensured the community banded together when a threat was near.
But here is where Reicher connects the biology to the modern cultural critique. He argues that modern society has just blindly decided that the oxytocin response is the only quote-unquote healthy way to process stress.
Right, and therefore men are being actively punished for not mirroring female emotional patterns.
He uses this really striking metaphor to describe the cultural expectation.
The eagle metaphor.
Yes. He argues that punishing men for their cortisol-driven stoicism is like fining eagles for refusing to swim.
It's a vivid way of illustrating his point. We are looking at a biological optimization, this ability to remain quiet and hyper-focused under intense pressure, and we're culturally rebranding it as a pathology.
So how does he trace that supposed pathology into real-world consequences? Because he doesn't just leave it at the neurochemistry.
No, he points to specific institutions.
Starting with the family court system.
Right, he brings up a 2020 case from a Texas divorce court.
According to Riker's account of those proceedings, the judge stripped a father of his primary custody rights. And the stated justification was that the father lacked emotional availability.
Which Riker uses as the primary example of his thesis. He points out this isn't an isolated incident at all.
Not even close. The book claims that 23 states have actually written this specific type of bias right into their legal frameworks.
Utilizing highly subjective terms like emotional expressiveness as metrics in custody evaluations.
Riker views this as a systemic demand for men to perform vulnerability.
In his view, the legal system is demanding that men essentially act like women in order to maintain a relationship with their own children.
And he claims this exact same dynamic has completely captured the corporate world too.
Especially in the tech sector.
Yeah, he dedicates significant space to the 2017 James Damore Google memo.
For those of you who might have forgotten the specifics of that controversy,
Damore was the Google engineer who wrote an internal memo questioning the company's diversity initiatives.
but Riker focuses heavily on what Damore actually cited in that memo.
Right, Riker emphasizes that Damore didn't write an opinion piece. He cited peer-reviewed studies on biological sex differences.
The author highlights the specific data points Damore used, like studies indicating that male brains average a 23% larger volume in spatial reasoning regions,
And that men, on average, test much higher for systemizing tendencies.
meaning an interest in things, mechanics, and systems.
While conversely, the data Damore cited showed women generally reporting higher interest in people and social dynamics.
So the book's interpretation of this event is that Damore wasn't fired because the science he cited was debunked,
No, Riker argues Damore was fired for committing wrongthink.
because the biological data conflicted with Google's corporate mandate, which Riker says treats men and women as biologically interchangeable blank slates.
Damore had to be exiled.
The author actually equates the reaction of Silicon Valley human resources departments to a modern witch hunt.
Claiming that men are being forced to perform ignorance to keep their jobs, in the exact same way they have to perform vulnerability to keep their kids.
If we connect this to the broader cultural messaging, Riker points to pop culture to demonstrate how deeply embedded this expectation is in our collective psyche.
Oh, the Marriage Story example?
Yes, the 2019 film. He uses it as a prime example of this dynamic playing out on screen.
That part of the book is fascinating because of how he contrasts the two lead characters, Adam Driver's character and Scarlett Johansson's character.
Riker observes that Driver's character, who is reserved, stoic, and internalizes his stress, is portrayed by the narrative as distant.
He's subtly villainized for quietly repairing his son's bike instead of talking about his feelings.
Meanwhile, Johansson's character is shown explosively yelling curses in front of their child.
And the film frames this as a necessary, valid, and authentic release of emotion.
Right. Riker argues the film is engineered to leave absolutely no doubt in the viewer's mind about which parent they're supposed to empathize with.
For the author, this perfectly encapsulates the cultural narrative. Loud, emotional expressiveness is deemed morally superior to quiet, stoic problem solving.
So what is his proposed solution to this? Because Riker doesn't just outline the grievance.
He actually details a legislative concept. He calls it the Fatherhood Preservation Act.
According to the text, this proposed act would legally require family court judges to recognize male stoicism not as a psychological defect, but as a valid cultural and biological adaptation.
He uses another animal kingdom analogy here. He compares human males to silverback gorillas.
He notes that male primates have survived for millennia precisely by containing vulnerability.
They don't weep or seek emotional validation when a leopard attacks, they act.
Riker's core argument here is that until the legal system respects biological reality, men will continue to be gaslit.
Which naturally leads to the next major argument in the text.
If men are being penalized at the individual level for their biology, what is happening to the physical and institutional spaces where men gather?
The author argues that we are witnessing the complete eradication of male sanctuaries under the guise of fairness.
And he provides a substantial amount of data to map out this institutional collapse.
He starts with one of the most prominent examples, the Boy Scouts of America.
He points out that after the organization made the decision to admit girls in 2017, the foundational culture fundamentally shifted.
The statistic he highlights is just staggering.
2 million members lost.
In just 5 years following that decision.
And he directly questions the mainstream narrative that this was just a natural decline in interest.
Riker argues that boys simply learn differently than girls. His premise is that boys compete more ferociously, they take different types of physical risks, and they bond through shared struggle and hierarchy.
His claim is that by introducing a female presence into that specific environment, the alchemy of that male bonding is instantly neutralized.
He scales this argument up to higher education too, specifically targeting Harvard University.
Riker notes that in 2017, Harvard instituted a controversial ban on single-gender clubs,
Effectively targeting the all-male final clubs and fraternities.
The book points to the immediate financial fallout of this policy, a 30% drop in male alumni donations virtually overnight.
Riker's interpretation of this financial data is blunt. He states that men will simply not pay to fund their own institutional erasure.
He also looks at the commercial sector, citing data from California between 2015 and 2020.
According to the book, 85% of male-only fitness centers and gyms in the state faced gender discrimination lawsuits.
He highlights a specific, almost absurd case where a weightlifting club in Los Angeles was sued by a woman.
Yeah, she claimed that the mere presence of its heavy dumbbells in the atmosphere of the gym caused her emotional distress.
And Riker juxtaposes this with the fact that women's-only gyms, like Curves, operate nationwide without any legal friction or claims of discrimination whatsoever.
To give you, the listener, the historical context Riker uses to frame this, he argues that ancient and historical societies deeply understood the utilitarian value of male cohesion.
He references Sparta's Agoj system.
Right, which removed boys from the broader society to train them in exclusively male cohorts, forging highly disciplined, tightly bonded warriors.
He also points to the medieval guild system, which restricted apprenticeships to men to ensure the passing down of tangible, rigorous, trade-based mastery.
The phrase he uses in the book is the alchemy of unfiltered male collaboration.
It's a powerful phrase.
It is. Riker claims that when men are allowed to exist in exclusively male spaces, they develop a silent language of competence.
But his argument is that this language is completely destroyed when institutions mandate mixed-gender environments.
Because the focus immediately shifts from meritocracy and problem solving to conflict resolution and behavioral policing.
But the author notes that this structural dismantling has triggered a massive counter-movement.
The fourth space movement.
Exactly. Riker claims that because mainstream institutions have essentially declared war on masculinity, men are quietly digging trenches.
They're rebuilding entirely new structures outside the reach of these captured systems.
And the examples he gives of this fourth space rebellion are really fascinating.
He starts in the tech world. He mentions a group in Wyoming called Prometheus AI Labs.
According to Riker's research, this is an entirely all-male development team.
It was founded by a tech CEO who had previously been fired from a mainstream firm for refusing to implement gender quotas in his hiring practices.
And the result of that unrestricted environment, according to the book, is that this all-male team recently patented a language model that outpaces ChatGPT-4 by 9% on complex logic tests.
For Riker, this isn't just an anecdote. He presents it as empirical proof.
Proof that when you remove what he terms DEI requirements and allow unfiltered male collaboration to thrive, meritocracy naturally reasserts itself and innovation explodes.
He also explores how this is playing out in physical spaces, detailing a network he calls the Iron Brotherhood.
Riker describes this as a coalition of 42 underground gyms operating across Texas.
These aren't standard commercial gyms either. He notes that men are sparring in MMA cages while actively studying and debating the Stoic philosophy of Epictetus.
And he points out that their membership tripled following recent expansions of Title IX's policies at universities.
It's a very deliberate merging of physical resilience and mental fortitude.
Riker also provides an international example to show this is a global phenomenon.
The Valkyria group in Norway.
Yes. These are described as resurrected Viking warrior houses, sworn brotherhoods that take their bonds incredibly seriously.
When the government in Oslo attempted to shut these houses down, citing concerns over their exclusivity, Riker describes how 600 bearded men simply stormed the Parliament Plaza.
Singing Wagner in unison.
The author notes that while the media labeled the demonstration as toxic, the men involved viewed it as a necessary assertion of their right to exist in a shared brotherhood.
What the author is mapping out here is a strategic retreat.
He cites Cambridge researchers who found that men who participate in single-sex communities score 20% higher on resilience metrics.
The fourth space movement, as Riker defines it, is about creating parallel infrastructures that are completely off the grid.
Zones where men can collaborate, compete, and exist without the constant anxiety of being monitored or policed by human resources departments or gender equity councils.
Which brings us to perhaps the most intense and economically focused argument in the text.
If men are retreating from corporate and social institutions, how are they approaching the most foundational institution of all?
Marriage. Riker dedicates a massive portion of the book to the economics of divorce.
He frames modern marriage not as a romantic partnership, but as a heavily rigged economic casino.
He approaches it almost entirely through the lens of risk assessment.
He pulls a multitude of stories from the digital trenches to illustrate this, specifically focusing on the Reddit forum r/divorce_men,
which he notes has an active membership of over 300,000 men.
He highlights one particular story about a man he refers to as Dave.
According to Riker's retelling of the forum post, Dave was the primary breadwinner, working 80-hour weeks to build a life for his family.
But Dave's wife eventually had an affair with her CrossFit trainer.
However, because they lived in a no-fault divorce state, the infidelity had little bearing on the financial dissolution of the marriage.
In the ensuing divorce, Riker writes that Dave lost his house, half of his accumulated retirement account, and even custody of his border collie.
The author emphasizes that Dave's only crime in this scenario was being the higher earner.
The anecdote ends with Dave sleeping on a friend's couch, actively mailing monthly checks to his ex-wife so she can continue to live in the house he paid for,
alongside the man she cheated on him with.
Riker uses this highly emotive story to set the stage, but he insists that Dave is not an anomaly.
That is a crucial point in Riker's framework. He moves from the anecdote to the macro-level statistics to prove this is a systemic feature, not a bug.
Drawing on data he attributes to the American Psychological Association, Riker notes that in no-fault divorce states, an overwhelming 80% of divorces are initiated by women.
He argues this is because the legal framework ensures there is often zero financial consequence.
And sometimes significant financial gain.
For the party initiating the split.
Furthermore, he points out that 23 states still legally enforce lifetime alimony for marriages that lasted over 10 years.
Riker synthesizes all of this into a concept he dubs the alimony industrial complex.
He argues that historically, in medieval times, families paid dowries to unload daughters.
But today, he claims the system has inverted into a postmodern dowry.
According to the book, the modern legal system allows women to unilaterally terminate a contract and legally walk away with half of a man's accumulated wealth.
Plus ongoing monthly checks, which Riker describes as state-mandated compensation for emotional labor.
Riker views this as an ecosystem built entirely on male financial surrender.
And he's particularly critical of how the state enforces this surrender.
He shares a shocking statistic regarding the state of Illinois, which runs what they call a child support interest program.
According to the book, this program charges fathers 12% annual interest on any overdue payments.
A punitive rate that rivals or exceeds many high-interest credit cards.
The international comparisons he makes are even more severe. He cites data that the UK's Child Support Agency locks up roughly 12,000 men annually for missing payments.
Riker explicitly compares this practice to the resurrection of 19th century debtors' prisons.
His cynical conclusion is that modern legal systems didn't actually abolish debtors' prisons. They simply refined them and reserved them exclusively for fathers.
So how does the book say men are reacting to this legal and financial minefield?
Riker details the rapid expansion of the MGTOW movement, men going their own way.
He suggests that men are logically analyzing the odds of financial annihilation in family court and are simply choosing to opt out of the marriage system entirely.
He brings up a piece of media that went incredibly viral to illustrate this mindset.
An essay written by an ex-Marine titled, "Why I Picked My Dog Instead of a Wife."
According to Riker, the Marine's logic is flawlessly rooted in self-preservation.
The essay argues that his dog will never claim half his military retirement pay.
We'll never blame him for lacking emotional availability.
And will never drag him into a family court to battle over custody.
Riker notes this essay resonated so deeply across the internet that it was shared millions of times.
He also points to content creators, like a podcaster named Davey Wavy,
who chose to live in a converted van specifically to escape what he calls the marriage industrial complex.
The book notes that Wavy's video series documenting this lifestyle choice racked up 12 million views.
The core question Wavy asks his audience is why any man should work 60 hours a week just to fund someone else's lifestyle arbitration in court.
And Riker notes that this isn't a fringe sentiment. MGTOW-focused YouTube channels grew by 300% between 2018 and 2023.
To solidify his argument that this is a mainstream shift, Riker points to Gallup polling data.
The data shows that 35% of men under the age of 30 now view the institution of marriage as completely outdated.
Riker's analysis of that statistic is vital to his overall thesis.
He argues that popular media often dismisses this trend by claiming young men are simply afraid of commitment or suffering from a pedo pan syndrome.
Riker completely rejects that premise. He frames this trend as a highly logical, calculated strategy of sexual capital flight.
He argues that smart, capable men are looking at a legal system where signing a government contract allows the other party to unilaterally terminate it and legally seize their assets.
By choosing not to play the game, Riker argues, these men are fiercely protecting their resources, their labor, and their autonomy.
If adult men are executing this sexual capital flight from marriage and corporate spaces, how does the book describe the environment for the next generation?
That brings us to Riker's analysis of the education system.
He argues that young boys are facing systemic emasculation from the moment they step into a kindergarten classroom.
The book presents K-12 data that paints a very dire picture of male educational outcomes.
Riker notes that nationwide, boys currently trail girls in literacy by a staggering 18 percentage points.
However, despite this massive and documented achievement gap, he cites Department of Education data showing that 85% of special tutoring funds,
specifically those originating from No Child Left Behind initiative,
are funneled directly into girls' reading programs.
Riker refers to this as Newtonian logic. He claims that for every feminist policy action implemented in schools, there is an equal and deliberate destruction of male potential.
And he argues the behavioral policing is just as intense as the funding disparity.
The book claims that boys placed in predominantly female-dominated classroom environments are 8 times more likely to be medicated for simply acting like boys.
The author's premise here is that natural male biology, the testosterone, the inherent need for physical movement, the aggressive competitive drive, is no longer accommodated in schools.
Instead, it is pathologized as a behavioral defect, like ADHD, that requires pharmaceutical intervention like Ritalin to suppress and manage.
He also observes how educational meritocracy itself is being dismantled, which he claims is done specifically to obscure areas where boys naturally excel.
A key example he uses is the Math Olympiad.
Riker points out that the competition recently made the decision to replace raw numerical scores with equity badges.
According to Riker's framework, the implementation of equity badges has nothing to do with fostering a healthy, inclusive environment.
He argues it is a deliberate structural attempt to hide male dominance in fields requiring advanced spatial reasoning and mathematics,
effectively prioritizing the emotional comfort of the participants over objective, factual achievement.
But according to the text, the K-12 system is just the conditioning phase.
Right. Riker argues that when these boys eventually reach college, they are funneled into what he refers to as campus kangaroo courts.
This is where the book dives deeply into the weaponization of Title IX.
To illustrate his point, he details the harrowing legal battle of a student referred to as John Doe at the University of Michigan.
The John Doe case serves as a cornerstone for Riker's argument regarding the complete evaporation of due process for men on college campuses.
According to the details provided in the book, John Doe was subjected to a university disciplinary hearing following an accusation of sexual assault.
Riker emphasizes that the university panel overseeing the hearing consisted entirely of Title IX activists.
During the proceedings, Doe presented hard, undeniable text message evidence directly from his accuser.
The text explicitly stated, "I wanted it, and stop apologizing, you didn't hurt me."
And Riker highlights the panel's reaction to this evidence. According to the book, the university panel completely ignored the exculpatory text messages and expelled him anyway.
functionally ruining his academic career and reputation.
Fortunately for the student, John Doe took the university to federal court.
Riker notes that a federal judge ruled decisively in Doe's favor, awarding him $2 million in damages.
Furthermore, the judge explicitly labeled the university's disciplinary process a sham, dressed in academic robes.
Riker uses this specific lawsuit to unpack a much broader critique of Title IX tribunals nationwide.
He cites statistics indicating that 51% of U.S. colleges actively prohibit the cross-examination of accusers in these hearings.
He further notes that 87% of accused men are found guilty in these Cantus systems.
Systems that operate without standard constitutional due process.
To Riker, this data proves these are not truth-seeking justice systems.
They are ideological show trials designed to transmute male futures into female social capital.
He broadens this argument to the national stage by discussing the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court confirmation hearings.
Riker observes that before a single fact was legally verified or corroborated, national media outlets ran headlines demanding the immediate removal of the nominee.
He points out that the media immediately adopted the term survivor rather than alleged victim, bypassing the presumption of innocence entirely.
He also brings up the infamous Rolling Stone article written by Jackie Coakley, which fabricated an entire narrative about a fraternity gang rape at the University of Virginia.
That case is particularly illustrative for the author's broader point.
He notes that while Rolling Stone was eventually forced to pay $3 million in damages to the fraternity, whose reputation was maliciously smeared.
Coakley, the journalist who fabricated the story, faced zero personal or legal consequences.
Riker argues this outcome perfectly encapsulates a modern cultural ecosystem where men are deemed guilty until proven extinct.
And where levying false accusations against men carries absolutely no downside risk for the accuser.
So the obvious question Riker poses is, how do men survive in this environment?
He introduces a behavioral concept he calls the red pill defense, or what he terms forensic masculinity.
Because he claims society defaults to believing women unconditionally, Riker advises his readers that their only viable defense is to legally document and record every single interaction.
He argues that texts must be obsessively saved, GPS locations logged, and explicit consent recorded.
In this environment, he says, storing data is the modern man's new armor.
He notes how deeply this legally defensive paranoia has penetrated mainstream culture.
Riker points to a specific episode of the television show Better Call Saul, where the main character successfully exploits legal loopholes in a university Title IX hearing.
While the show is fiction, Riker interviewed law firms who reported a measurable 20% surge in consultation requests from male college students immediately after that specific episode aired.
His conclusion is that young men are realizing they need to build a legal war chest before they even dare to go on a first date.
It is a profound shift in how young men are navigating social interactions, according to the author.
But Riker doesn't stop at education. He moves his focus to the institutions that literally defend the nation.
He argues that the very men who are tasked with doing the most dangerous, physically demanding jobs to keep society functioning are being aggressively pathologized by the systems they protect.
He begins this critique by focusing heavily on the military and the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Riker recounts the story of Marine Corporal Jake Hernandez,
a double amputee who sacrificed his legs in combat.
According to the book, when Hernandez went to the VA seeking support, the administration initially offered him a pamphlet on gender-affirming care.
Before they would even begin discussions regarding prosthetics for his missing limbs.
Riker uses that anecdote to pivot to the macro-level budget priorities of the military.
He cites Defense Department memos showing that since 2016, an astonishing $13 billion has been actively redirected away from veteran suicide prevention programs.
According to Riker, those funds were instead funneled into gender parity initiatives
and mandatory sensitivity seminars designed to teach military staff how to deconstruct male privilege.
The author frames this as an institutional bureaucratic contempt for the very men who have sacrificed their bodies for the state.
He further illustrates this by bringing up the high-profile case of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher.
Gallagher was a highly decorated combat medic who found himself court-martialed for battlefield decisions.
Riker points to trauma studies indicating that the split-second decisions required in hellish, chaotic combat scenarios are now routinely being analyzed and pathologized as toxic behavior.
By Pentagon bureaucrats sitting in safe offices.
Right, and the book emphasizes that Gallagher's own platoon testified that his actions saved 14 Allied lives that day.
Yet the military justice system prosecuted him relentlessly until massive public outrage ultimately forced an acquittal.
And Riker argues that this institutional betrayal follows these men home into civilian life.
He discusses the case of Army Ranger Marcus Vollmer,
A soldier who was awarded 2 Silver Stars for his actions in Afghanistan.
The book details how Vollmer ended up losing custody of his daughters in family court.
The judge's reasoning. They cited his combat-induced PTSD diagnosis as proof of instability.
Riker points out the horrific irony of this dynamic. Society demands that men endure massive, soul-crushing trauma to physically protect it.
And then the legal system uses the psychological scars of that exact trauma to strip them of their families.
This naturally leads into Riker's fierce critique of the broader healthcare system's approach to male well-being.
He argues that modern medicine applies a unisex approach that actively ignores and harms male biology.
The statistics he provides are stark. In the United States, men account for roughly 80% of all suicides.
Yet, Riker claims the healthcare system's primary response is to funnel these men into talk therapy, suggest they join yoga studios, or prescribe mindfulness apps.
Riker argues that these specific modalities are fundamentally designed for estrogen-dominant brains that process trauma verbally and communally.
He contrasts the American approach with international models that acknowledge biological differences.
He highlights Norway's Manslip program.
According to the book, instead of asking depressed men, how does that make you feel?
The doctors in the Manslip program are trained to ask a fundamentally different question.
What are you doing to fix it?
And Riker points to the data resulting from that program.
He notes that Norway saw an 18% drop in male suicides in just 3 years after implementing this action-oriented, problem-solving approach to male mental health.
He brings it back to the States by detailing a specific clinic in Texas that implemented what they call the Spartan Protocol.
Riker breaks down the mechanics of this protocol. It involves putting depressed men on a 12-week carnivore diet,
engaging them in intense combat sports like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu,
and utilizing rigorous biometric tracking to monitor their hormonal levels.
The results Riker claims this clinic achieved are significant.
According to his data, suicide rates among the patients who completed this protocol plummeted by 40%.
Riker's conclusion regarding healthcare is blunt and biologically focused. He states that biology is binary.
His thesis is that testosterone fundamentally demands physical action, competition, and problem-solving to remain regulated.
Conversely, he argues that male cortisol crumbles into depression if the man doesn't have a literal or metaphorical heavyweight to lift.
He argues that if the medical establishment genuinely wants to save men's lives, it needs to throw out the pastel-colored mindfulness brochures and bring back the iron.
Which brings us to the final overarching argument of the book.
Riker claims that in order for modern institutions to justify all of this, the family court biases, the educational disparities, the workplace exile, activists have had to fundamentally rewrite historical narratives.
Riker uses a very potent historical reality check to demonstrate this point.
He looks at the 19th Amendment, which famously granted women the right to vote in the United States.
Riker points out the historical fact that the amendment was ratified in 1920 by 36 state legislatures.
But the key detail he emphasizes, which he claims is often omitted from modern historical framing, is that every single one of those 36 state legislatures was comprised entirely of men.
It was male gatekeepers who voluntarily voted to share their institutional power.
Yet, Riker argues, the modern historical narrative taught in schools and universities paints men purely as a monolithic, tyrannical force of oppressors who have done nothing but hold women down for millennia.
And Riker proposes a specific sociological theory as to why this historical manipulation occurs.
He claims that by actively changing the past to label men as constant, irredeemable oppressors, it creates an ongoing, perpetual moral justification to seize their wealth, their labor, and their self-respect in the present day.
His argument is that if men are deemed inherently guilty of historical crimes by virtue of their biology, then taking their assets in family court or firing them for wrongthink at Google isn't viewed as theft or discrimination.
It is successfully reframed as righteous social justice.
But the author notes that this rigid narrative control is beginning to fracture. leading to what he terms the red pill awakening.
He observes that institutional attempts at censorship are now massively backfiring.
He uses the example of the author Rush Tvith to prove this point.
According to the book, when Amazon made the decision to ban Rush Tvith's book from its platform, it didn't silence him.
Instead, Riker notes that underground men's groups began rapidly circulating PDFs of the text, comparing it to Soviet samizdat.
As a direct result of the ban, Riker claims the book's underground sales exploded to 20,000 copies.
The author states that in the digital age, trying to erase a controversial idea is like trying to bury a live grenade.
He also points to the phenomenon of Andrew Tate and his Hustler University platform.
Now, Riker sidesteps the myriad controversies surrounding Tate and focuses strictly on the massive demand for his messaging.
After Tate was systematically banned from nearly every mainstream social media platform, Riker notes that his private Discord server ballooned to 500,000 active users.
Riker shares a specific anecdote about a 24-year-old fentanyl addict who credited Tate's messaging for saving his life.
According to the book, the young man stated that Tate's relentless focus on work ethic, personal accountability, and the absolute rejection of victimhood offered him a rigid structure that endless coddling talk therapy never provided.
The book also contrasts the popularity of different academic paths to show where young men's interests actually lie.
Riker points out that while modern university-sanctioned gender studies departments are seeing withering enrollment numbers, Jordan Peterson's lectures on biblical archetypes, hierarchy, and personal responsibility packed massive auditoriums.
Riker cites specific enrollment data from the University of Toronto to back this up.
He notes that Peterson's course had 397 enrolled students, compared to a mere 86 students in the university's feminist theory classes.
Riker interprets this stark contrast in data to mean that young men are desperately craving structure, hierarchy, and a definitive purpose.
They are actively rejecting the postmodern deconstruction of their identities.
And because mainstream platforms continually throttle, shadow ban, or outright deplatform these voices, Riker concludes the book by detailing how men are simply building parallel economies.
He describes how men are utilizing blockchain technology, decentralized crypto treasuries, the Nostr protocol, and encrypted communication forums like Digital Bastion.
By doing so, they are recreating digital platforms where they can freely engage in that silent language of competence without the looming threat of digital puritanism or algorithmic cancellation.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as we conclude our analysis of this text.
Considering all the data sets, the legal precedents, and the historical arguments Riker has laid out, if society continues to pathologize the very masculine instincts, the risk-taking, the stoicism, the physical endurance that physically built and currently maintain its infrastructure.
And if men, quietly and logically, decide to walk away, to go their own way, and build their own parallel insulated societies,
what happens to the world they leave behind?
When the builders and the protectors simply stop participating in the mainstream, who is going to keep the lights on?
It is a profound and incredibly complex question to end on.
It really is. To summarize Conrad Riker's ultimate message in his book, Gynocentric Justice, biology is not bigotry, and men must stop apologizing for simply existing.
That is the core of his manifesto.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into some incredibly dense and provocative source material. Before you go, please make sure you take a moment to like and subscribe to the show. It truly means the world to us and helps us keep doing this.
And remember to check out the primary source.
Yes, remember, check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook Gynocentric Justice: Courts Betraying Men, Rewarding Women, so you can review the author's citations for yourself. And be sure to follow at Conrad and Riker at Substack.
Stay curious and keep critically evaluating the data presented to you.
And always keep questioning the narratives around you.